Thank you, Acting Speaker. I rise to speak today about the Gambling Regulation Amendment Bill 2023. But before I get there, with the indulgence of the Acting Speaker, I would like to make mention of the board of the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation. It was an absolute honour for me to be elected to the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation 2 weeks ago in a joint sitting. We had our first board meeting on Friday just past, and I'm also joined on the board by the member for Shepparton, Kim O'Keefe, and the member for Malvern, Michael O'Brien. The Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation is a statutory authority created by the Victorian Parliament, specifically to address the challenge of gambling harm in the Victorian community. It funds research and other activities that add to the knowledge and understanding of gambling harm. It works with partners and communities across Victoria to inform people about the risks of gambling and to provide support to those who need it, included people affected by someone else's gambling. As the member for Mordialloc mentioned, the Andrews Labor government provided the VRGF with $153 million over 4 years in the 2019 to 2020 state budget. This represents the nation's largest commitment to address gambling harm. It is a privilege for me to represent the Labor Party on the Foundation's board, and I give my word that I will use my seat at the table to advocate from the very best of my ability. It was kind also of the member for Narre Warren South to give the VRGF a shout-out, along with the member for Mordialloc. Anyone, family or friends who are experiencing any harm by gambling should reach out to the VRGF. Problem gambling or gambling addiction, Acting Speaker, is a blight on our community. Its social costs and impacts are enormous, and it's simply devastating. It tears apart families, and too often it destroys lives. I'll be blunt and say that I absolutely loathe pokie machines, because I have seen firsthand the destruction that these stupid machines can cause. In my teenage years, I worked for a while in a hot chicken and chips shop in Williamstown. It was called Hot Wings, which was right next to, and still to this very day, still have great chips and chicken, right next to Williamstown's high-rise public housing estate. It is also next to the Williamstown RSL. Every day that I worked there, elderly people from the housing estate would come in for a meal. These were people who were completely dependent on the age pension to get by, and they would come to the shop for a meal as soon as they had cashed their pension allowance. Now, the first time that you saw them after they had cashed their pension, they would order a full meal: chicken, vegetables, salad, you name it. But then the next time they came in, they'd simply order the $2 chips. Why? Because it's all that they had left. Because in the meantime, they'd gone down to the RSL, they had their pension in their pocket, and they had lost all of their money at the pokies. Every single time, and it always broke my heart. Cooroit is a diverse community, picking up Deer Park all the way to the cusp of Melton. We take in two local government areas, Brimbank and Melton, and it goes without saying that we are one of the most disadvantaged areas in Victoria. Some of you may not know that Brimbank has the highest losses to gambling of any local government area in Victoria. That's correct. We are ranked number 1. Literally number 1 in the state. It's not a stat that any LGA wants to achieve. Gamblers in Brimbank LGA lost almost $104 million to electronic gambling machines in the first 7 months of the financial year alone. Almost $500,000 a day are being lost to these pokie machines. It's terrible in our community. This means that urgent action to tackle problem gambling in my electorate is needed now. So that preamble brings me to the Gambling Regulation Amendment Bill, which is before us today. This bill makes changes to Victoria's wagering and betting framework. These changes are necessary to provide flexibility to government when awarding the next wagering and betting licence, and to maximise the benefit of the state through the licensing process. The proposed bill will make amendments to permit the award of multiple licences with exclusivity periods determined by the responsible minister, and remove the no less favourable industry funding requirement for the wagering and betting licence. The current wagering and betting licence is held by Tabcorp and commenced on the 16th of August 2012. It expires on the 15th of August 2024. The licence permits the licence to conduct authorised betting competitions defined as wagering, approved betting competitions, approved simulated racing, a betting exchange, and to operate the only off-course wagering and betting retail network in Victoria. The process for awarding the next wagering and betting licence to operate from August 2024 is currently underway. Legislation in Victoria currently only permits one wagering and betting licence to be in operation for the duration of the licence term. By amending the law to permit the award of multiple licences with ill-exclusive periods determined by the Minister and to remove the no less favourable industry funding, the state will be able to consider a broader set of options for the market. This additional flexibility will allow the state to attract greater interest in the licence and maximise the value of the licence to the state, and is consistent with the provisions for the public lottery licence and Keno licences. The bill will provide government with the discretion to determine any periods of ill-exclusivity for the next licence or licences. An ill-exclusivity period means that the government would not be able to issue another wagering and betting licence during the period of ill-exclusivity. Changes to the Act that add the flexibility to determine periods of ill-exclusivity means that the government will be better placed to maximise the value of wagering and betting licence. For example, if it maximises value to the state, it will allow the government to issue one wagering and betting licence for a set term that concludes before the licence term ends. After this, the government could issue additional licences. This is achieved in the bill by inserting a provision in the Principal Act that allows the Minister to specify one or more periods of time as the ill-exclusivity period for a wagering and betting licence. The Act currently stipulates that before granting a licence application, the Minister must be satisfied that the applicant has entered into or made a binding offer to enter into arrangements within the Victorian racing industry, which are no less favourable to the Victorian racing industry than the arrangements under the current wagering and betting licence. The no less favourable requirement arose from the concurrent privatisation of the Victorian TAB and the introduction of gaming machines in Victoria. It addressed concerns from the racing industry that it would be disadvantaged by the privatisations and lose out on wagering revenue previously provided to the racing industry by the Victorian TAB. The government recognises that the current wagering and betting licensing arrangements reflect market conditions that no longer exist. Significant changes to the gambling environment, including developments in technology, the associated growth of online gambling, and the removing of advertising restrictions on bookmakers licensed in other states and territories, have occurred over the last decade. As a result of these changes, the wagering and betting market has become a national market, and the wagering and betting licensee is subject to far greater competition from bookmakers licensed in other states and territories. As such, it is unlikely that a new licensee will be willing to purchase a Victorian licence if it is required to enter into a no less favourable funding arrangement with the Victorian racing industry. The Victorian licence is principally orientated towards the provision of retail betting due to the highly saturated market for wagering. And noting that online wagering is considered more harmful, the grant of multiple Victorian licences will not increase participation or player losses. Research indicates that there is a higher risk of gambling harm associated with online wagering. If the state is unable to award a new licensee, those who shift to online for the first time or who increase their online gambling activity will be at higher risk of harm than if retail wagering is retained. The increased risk of harm for those people is likely to outweigh the benefits from the estimated small proportion of retail-only wagering customers who are likely to stop all wagering if retail wagering is not available. Further, the Victorian licensee or licensees will be subject to the strongest regulator in the country, the Victorian Gambling and Casino Control Commission, or otherwise known as VCCC. The VCCC has oversight of all gambling and gaming activities in Victoria, from pubs and clubs through to casinos. It is required to undertake activities to minimise gambling harm, and harm minimisation considerations are central to the work. I commend this bill to the Assembly. I will work to ensure the state regulation of the gaming industry will continue to be strengthened under this government, and I will have much more to say in the area of gambling reform in this place during my term. Thank you, Acting Speaker.